For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last, then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, saying, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last.
If you woke up this morning hoping to be a miserable human being, well, I have good news for you. This passage that we have heard today from Matthew's Gospel gives us a veritable blueprint on how to become and stay miserable. So let's look this blueprint over together now and make sure, if we're wanting to be miserable, discontent people, that we have paid attention to some of the best strategies for staying and becoming miserable. Now, the first thing to note is that as these workers go out into the field to work, it is absolutely clear that they have no intent on being loyal to the landowner who has hired them. It is clear that they're not giving any attention either to the work that they are about doing, and instead their sole reason for working seems to be the reward. Now, that leads us to a first lesson if we want to be and stay miserable. The first thing we must make sure that we do, we must not work for the sake of work, not work for the sake of loyalty, certainly don't work for the sake of service, and instead put all of our attention into the reward. Now, whether that reward is payment, whether that reward is recognition, doesn't matter as much as long as we're focused on the reward itself. Most powerfully, if we really want to stay miserable, most powerfully that reward should lie entirely in the hands of other people, so that the emotional state of ourselves is in the control of others. That's a great way to become and to stay miserable, is to give all that power to other people to control how we feel. Now, we want to make sure as we do this that we do not put our attention to anything that could make us believe that the work itself is of value. That's critical to keep being miserable. We cannot see the work itself as of value, and we certainly, absolutely cannot give any attention to whom we're working for, most especially in the life of faith. We absolutely would not want to give attention to God as the one for whom we work. We want all of our attention to go towards the reward. It's really the only valid reason for working if we want to be miserable. Now, this leads us to our second point of being and staying miserable. If you really want to be miserable and stay miserable, the other thing these workers do that really can help us in that endeavor is they make sure that they are comparing what they get with other people. The folks, you can imagine the first workers standing at the back of the line. They're watching the other workers get paid. And they know that these workers have only been working for an hour or maybe a little bit more. And they see those very first workers that only worked an hour or so get paid the amount that they had been promised. And so these workers begin to compare what they are going to get, what they expect to get, with those first workers. It's almost like you can see them imagining like Clark Griswold does in Christmas Vacation, where he hasn't yet gotten his bonus, and he's imagining that he's going to get this huge sum of money that will lead to the family getting a swimming pool. And then they have the same reaction. Having compared what they anticipate getting with what those first workers got, they are as crushed as Clark Griswold was when he received the Jelly of the Month Club for his bonus. They are infuriated. They are discontent. If we want to be miserable, one of the best things we can do is compare what we have or have been given with what others have or been given. It is a tried and true way through the years to ensure that we can become and stay miserable. It's certainly, we don't want to be in any kind of position where we are grateful for what we have or what we have been given. That is the anathema of being miserable. So be sure to focus our attention solely on our discontent, what we wish we had or what we think we are owed. And one of the things that can be helpful to maintain our misery in this is to slightly change the way in which we recite the Lord's Prayer. So if you want to be miserable, I would recommend that rather than saying something like, "Give us this day our daily bread," that instead we just tweak that language a little bit and say something like, "Give me today everything I think I am owed." Seems reasonable enough. And then a slight tweak towards the end, that little part where Jesus says we should say, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We could say, "Thy will be done," and then perhaps just switch it around a little bit and say, "Thy will be done as long as it is in accordance with my will." If we want to stay miserable, those would be some great ways to maintain our misery. Now, a third point that is critical but perhaps a bit subtle is when in the 11th verse of the passage that we heard, we hear that having received their pay, the usual daily wage, those first workers grumbled against the owner of the fields. Grumbling is such a great word. It really does sound like what it is. Grumble. It's a great word. And if we want to be miserable, grumbling is a fantastic way to do it. Now, what's key with grumbling is we don't want to just mutter under our own breath. No. That's not enough. To grumble effectively and maintain our misery, what we must do is find other people with whom we can grumble. You can almost hear as these workers who were hired first see some of the other workers that were at the front end of the first workers get the same wage as the last workers. You could almost hear their grumbling emerge from the text. They're so frustrated. And you can almost hear some of the gossip that would flow right out of that. "I bet he didn't even get this land legally. Oh, I bet he married into the money and now he just tries to give it away to people that don't deserve it. Oh, well, I hear that he goes to parties with tax collectors." You can almost hear those rumors just flowing out of their discontent. Now, this passage does, if we want to be and maintain our misery, this passage does offer a bit of a daring move that could lead towards the treacherous language of contentedness. We must watch this carefully, friends. because these workers grumble and they actually go and speak with the landowner. Now, if we really want to be discontent, if we really want to be miserable, we should always maintain our grumbling among other grumblers and never talk directly to those about whom we grumble. But if we do confront those with whom we have an issue, we want to make sure that we grumble in a way to them directly that is accusatory and is argumentative. And whatever we do not want to actually listen to any response. So fortunately, after the landowner explains himself, Matthew does not record Jesus finishing that parable with any response from those discontent workers. So we can only assume that to maintain their misery, they no longer carried on that conversation and went about their ways grumbling and spreading rumors about that landowner. But it is important, if we want to be miserable people, we must grumble and find other people with whom we can grumble. And do our best to avoid direct conversation, certainly avoiding listening to those with whom we have issues. Now, if for some strange reason this picture of becoming and maintaining our misery is not appealing to you, I suppose you could read this as a cautionary tale, and you could use this as a jumping point for seeking out ways to serve where the service itself is the reward, and those whom we serve are who we're loyal to. I suppose that could happen. And I suppose you could use this as a launching point for cultivating a sense of gratitude in your life and being grateful for what you do have and not just comparing to others, I suppose. And I suppose you could see this as a cautionary tale about not grumbling and making sure if we have an issue that we go and listen to those with whom we struggle. But I'm sure that we all see this story for what it is, a great way for us to be miserable people. So friends, let us leave this space, leave this time we've had together, hearing this word for what it is, a cautionary tale. None of us indeed want to be miserable people. We don't want to do that. And yet, so often our practices do lead us to misery. So in all truth, and with all sarcasm aside, let us wholeheartedly find those places to serve. Let us look at what we have with gratitude, and let us be a people who surround ourselves with voices that lift up and build up. And when we do come in conflict, yes, let us listen and speak with love. That is good news for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.